So World War II is going to bring a lot of job opportunities, but unfortunately, there will be obstacles that Mexican Americans will have to face in order to get those jobs. So we'll take a look at discrimination. We'll take a look at the reaction from the Mexican American community to that discrimination and resistance movements. We'll also be taking a look at the role that Mexican Americans played in World War II itself, as well as the Bracero program. The Bracero program was instituted during this time also as a reaction to the war. So first, let's go ahead and start off talking about job discrimination during World War II. All right, so the war is going to bring a lot of job opportunities, right? Especially in the defense industries. And so Mexican Americans will try to apply for these jobs. One example of this, a number of Tejanos migrated from Texas up into the northern cities looking for these jobs, these industrial jobs, right? About 60,000 Tejanos made this migration, which is a pretty significant number. But unfortunately, when they got to these northern cities, sometimes they were kept out of these jobs in the defense industry. One of the main reasons given for excluding Mexican Americans was the argument that they did not have the necessary skills, and these were skilled labor jobs, right? And so that was one of the reasons given for discriminating against Mexican Americans. And so there's training programs where Mexican Americans could have learned these skills and then gain access to these jobs. But there was exclusion from those training programs, right? So racist exclusion, discrimination taking place in allowing Mexican Americans to join these training programs, right? And so if they couldn't get the training, then they could be denied those jobs based on their skill level and experience. And so for many Mexican Americans during the early part of the war, they were forced to take low-paying, low-skilled jobs, right, in the defense industries, if they got a job at all. Many didn't get a job, period. And so if they did get a job, it was usually the jobs that nobody wanted, didn't pay that much, and were quite dangerous. So there was definitely racism in the defense industry during this time. Another reason why employers were hesitant to hire Mexican American workers was because they feared that Anglo workers would start to strike because they didn't want to work alongside Mexican Americans, right? And so that's another pressure that led employers to resist hiring Mexican Americans, even though there was a labor shortage at this time and workers were needed. The Congress of Industrial Workers, otherwise known as the CIO, played a role in trying to get Mexican Americans access to these jobs. This was one of the major unions of the time period, and it embraced Mexican American workers. The CIO had a philosophy of equality in the workplaces, trying to create equal conditions for Mexican American workers, such as equal pay. And so the CIO was very prominent in getting a lot of Mexican American workers into unions, right, into the union. And so the CIO fought for Mexican Americans to gain access to training programs so that they can earn the skills necessary to get those jobs in the defense industry. By the end of the war, you've seen at least 58,000 Mexican Americans who gained jobs in the defense industry. So over time, Mexican Americans were able to gain access to those jobs, but it took a lot of fighting. The Congress of Industrial Workers played a major role in getting Mexican American workers, but they were not the only union that was involved in fighting for the rights of Mexican American workers. So how did the government respond to all this discrimination that was taking place in the defense industries? Well, the president at the time, Franklin Roosevelt, you see Franklin Roosevelt over here, Franklin Roosevelt passed Executive Order 8802 in 1941. And the executive order basically put in place the Fair Employment Practices Committee. Okay, and the point of creating this committee was to ensure that there was equal opportunities for employment in the defense industry. Okay, so this is wartime. We need workers, and so the point came up that there was a lot of discrimination in the defense industry, and so finally the government reacted. The government did not react on their own, though. It took pushing from civil rights activists. Right, African American civil rights activists played a prominent role in pushing President Roosevelt to issue the Executive Order 8802. The problem was, though, that the Fair Employment Practices Committee could not force employers to hire Mexican Americans and African Americans and other minority groups, right? They didn't have the force of law behind them, but they were able to pressure these defense industries into hiring minorities. Executive Order 9346 is just another executive order that helps to strengthen the Fair Employment Practices Committee, giving them more regional offices and expanded powers. And during this time, you're going to see the FEPC requiring that employers document how many minority workers that they are hiring. Now, you would have some employers try to get around that, such as in Colorado, where some employers in the defense industry would hire a couple of Mexican Americans just to meet a certain quota or just to make it seem like they are following along with the policies of the FEPC, right? And so some employers were still using discrimination in their hiring practices, but they tried to cover it up by just hiring a few Mexican American workers, all right? So they were finding ways around it, but the executive orders were giving a little bit more power to the federal government in being able to stop discrimination, right? So it did help to a certain degree, but they couldn't force these employers to really hire a large, significant number of Mexican American workers. Some did, some did not. It was just depending on the particular employers, all right? Another reason why the government got involved in doing something about job discrimination, in addition to pushing from civil rights activists, was the good neighbor policy. The good neighbor policy was a shift in American foreign diplomacy in the sense that instead of intervening in Latin American countries using the U.S. military, now the U.S. Would try to cooperate with Latin American countries, setting up trade agreements with them and using diplomacy instead of sending the military in to try to affect Latin American politics, right? And so that was a major shift, and part of the reason for this is the U.S. is trying to have a better relationship with its Latin American neighbors. You got World War II going on. You don't want Latin American countries supporting the Axis powers or supporting, Nazi Germany, which some of them did have support for Nazi Germany during this time. And so the good neighbor policy was trying to create better relations between Latin American countries and the United States. And so in some cases, the government did not want to publicize the level of job discrimination that was taking place towards Mexican Americans during this time, because if that was publicized, then maybe Latin American countries might take a different stance on the U.S. and a different position as far as who they support in World War II. Okay, so basically, the U.S. wanted to maintain good relations with its neighbors. It agreed to stop intervening militarily in Latin America, and so that's the good neighbor policy. And so for that reason, the U.S. did not want to publicize some of the job discrimination, but the U.S. did at the same time still do something with these executive orders to try to stop so much job discrimination in the defense industries.